Hi there, Cardfight Vanguard fans. You've probably clicked into this wondering what the hell you've gotten yourself into, and in this case, I am going to tell you it's not that much, and if you're here, you probably aren't very sure exactly why you're here. This is an intro series, one where I talk about the different clans of Cardfight Vanguard, not because you're going to play them, but because in either side of the table, if you are up against one or if you're playing one, you need to understand how your clan operates within that framework. Then, after understanding how your side works, you can then learn about how the other side works, and at which case you have an understanding of the dynamic between the two clans. Knowing that Kagero deals with this and Royal Paladin deals with that is very important in the case where you're trying to control and mitigate the advantages of your opponent. In the case of this video, I am going to talk about a Dark Zone clan called Pale Moon. Unlike the rest of the Dark Zone clan, Pale Moon tends to be the odd sheep out. You have different cards that jump in and out of soul, and the soul is the focus here. You will notice that their motif, their style of doing things is that of a circus. And just like in a circus, you have things coming in and out, keeping the audience entertained, showing a great show, and nothing is ever truly gone. Things don't disappear when you talk about Pale Moon. They just hide in the soul where they are far more difficult to touch, and then come out, deal with your opponent, kind of mess with them, go back in, jump around, be all over the place, and become a general nuisance. Unlike the rest of the Dark Zone clan, they are very technical and hard to control in some cases. Now, much like some other clans, soul is their primary resource. It is something that they have to take care of very carefully. As a Pale Moon user, you will be taking a look at your soul and hoping that good things show up inside your soul because you're going to be using those cards. And you're trying to avoid putting too many unnecessary things into the soul because your soul is your resource that you will repeatedly use in and out of combat. Because they keep jumping in and out, they gain you advantage without actually being exposed onto the board, and that is their greatest advantage. They also have the Silver Thorns and other things, but let's get down to the cards but unlike the other clans that I've looked into, we're going to drop this list down because there's just too many technical things. What you have to understand is, for the most part, you're not going to see many of these things until the battle phase, so it's very important that you watch. Let's get down to it. Grade 4, the only card I am looking at the Grade 4, just because it is probably their signature move. Miracle of Luna, Square, Clifford. Now, Clifford's skill is, he's the basic on hit, something happens. In his case, on hit, choose a grade 2 or less from your soul, call it to R, gets 2,000 power. Not an exactly great card. Mind you, it is still a decent card. What it does teach you is they have the ability to call Superior Call from soul. Very important. Power boosts happen quite often with this clan because of all the jumping around. What is important is it usually, in almost every single case, it will not say open R. They can override previous rear guards to get additional attacks. They can jump in and out. Sometimes they will be allowed to call more than one unit out, but then they have to jump back into soul, which I will talk about later. Be very careful and watch out for the soul, especially on the first strike, because things that didn't happen on the G2 could very well happen on the G3, even if you weren't expecting it. The ride phase is very, very crucial for them in that sense. Let's move on to the next card, and since we're pretty much done with the G4, I'm going down to the G3 and my thoughts on them. The first card is probably one of the things that nobody ever thought was going to be a big deal again, Nightmare Doll Alice. Alice is one of those cards that teaches you a little bit of the tips and tricks on how to play the clan. Her skill is on rear guard and only on rear guard. CB1, put it into soul. When this unit attack hits, pay the cost, and you can call a Pale Moon unit onto the field. That, as long as it's not named Alice, because that's an infinite combo. So this card is essentially telling you, you must guard this, and if you don't, another attack happens. It doesn't have to be a Vanguard hit. It could hit right about anything. As long as it hits something, you're going to get an extra attack. For CB1, put it into soul. Now, putting it into soul would normally be a cost, but in this case, it will most likely be able to come out again because of the skills of Pale Moon. CB1 is a natural, because CB1 for an extra attack is quite a common costing nowadays, and it's these kinds of cards that make the tech options very, very strange when you get right down to thinking about how complicated Pale Moon can be. Because of the number of ways that things jump around and play around, you're going to have to control this chaos, this madness that happens in Pale Moon to be able to get something cohesive and understandable. That is part of your weakness. Be very careful. It is a G3, it is 10k, there are weaknesses to running it, but it also has some archetype pieces, and it is a Nightmare Doll, which is a subtype in their case. Now, going to another subtype, which is probably maybe my favorite among the other subtype, which is Silverthorn Lukier. Now, Silverthorn Dragon Tamer Lukier is here because she was probably one of the most expensive cards, and I would hazard to say is still a pretty decent choice just because of how crazy her skill can become. At skill, Limit Break 4, Counterblast 3, choose up to 1, grade 0, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 from Soul and call them to R. Basically a CB3 call 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. Yes, definite. CB3 call 4 is pretty good. And every time something jumps out of Soul, she gets a 3,000 power boost. An all-around decent card, used to be great power boost, great power, but now she's only somewhat decent. What makes her very strong, though, is the number of ways that she can evolve. And in this case, her reverse form, or her final, once she's basically overcome the reverse form, is two different ways of looking at it that make her very special. She's a very strong card that kind of tells you everything you need to know about Pale Moon. Things jump out, power happens, and suddenly you've got a 4-5 attack turn that just brutalizes you. And it can happen again because it's not too expensive. Now, it is quite common for strange cards to appear, and recently one strange G3 did appear that really got people to thinking a different way about Pale Moon, which I think is pretty interesting, and some of my friends have thought so too. Artilleryman, which is when a card goes into Soul, you may put that card into the drop zone. If you do, choose an opponent's rear guards with the same grade and retire it. That is a GB1 skill that is potentially quite powerful, actually. When you think about it, being able to retire on the opponent's just because something came out of your Soul and you threw it, you basically shot it at them, is pretty good. And his other skill is when your rear guard is put into Soul, increase this unit's power by the original power of that card put into Soul until end of turn. You have a case where power boosts happen, crazy stuff happen when they come out. In particular, though, the one thing that makes this card kind of scary is that it can happen on the opponent's turn, messing up their side of the combat field. Not only during your turn, but on their turn as well, which is very, very good. Cards like these do show up, and I really like this card because it kind of plays around with the idea that Pale Moon isn't going to be passive on the opponent's turn. It's still going to do its tricks, and those tricks are still going to have benefits and downsides to you, which is, nice. It's something that you should take a look at. Pale Moon is a very interesting clan because even the not so good G3s can be super good just because they are G3s and then they keep jumping in and out of combat making amazing plays. This is not a clan for the faint of heart just because of that fact. And you can make a lot of tricky decks and a lot of very strong decks just because you were trying to be very tricky. You don't have to be, but you will be benefiting from these amazing plays when they come together, and fun stuff happens. Always the fun stuff. Going down to the G2, the only card that I'm going to talk about in the G2 lineup is Misdirection. She kind of compounds the strength of Pale Moon in my experience. She is one of those strange cards that have a skill only when in Soul. When another Pale Moon card comes out from Soul, she comes out and at the end of the turn goes back in. Now, what's important here is that means that a single activator, a single card that comes out of Soul, means that she can just come out for free. What this means is a single CB it pulled out a card, you could have an entire lane just because of her. There's a G1 version, there's, if I remember correctly, there are some other versions of her, but what's important is Pale Moon has these cards. It is very important when you're up against a Pale Moon, or as a Pale Moon, to watch what goes into the Soul. The Soul is your lifeblood, and it dictates whether or not you will have a card advantage within the game. Watch out for cards like Misdirection, because as the game goes on, Misdirection will just gain value on top of value on top of value. Great card. Watch out for it. It is low on the power, that's why it's not always used, but then it's always an important consideration to make when a clan has such a card. Now for the G1, we're looking at two cards that more or less made the clan as it stands right now. The first card is Trapezius, and Trapezius is one of those cards that teaches you how Pale Moon runs. It is so important, in fact, that it basically went crazy in price just because of how useful and how many crazy things you can do with it. Whether or not you call it from hand, or whether you call it using other skills and then comes out of soul, the skill is when it comes onto the board, pick a rear guard, goes into soul, and then you call something out as long as it's not the same name as this unit. Very strong card, activates a lot of combos. Things that are jumping in and out have their auto skills activate usually, and in this case, since it doesn't have any other cost other than another card going in, you are increasing your soul advantage and at the same time activating cards that gain power. You are pulling out cards such as Misdirection for increased play just because you did that combo, and at the end of the turn you could probably use another card to put Purple Trapezius back into the soul and make fun stuff happen again. Very scary card, very strong card. If you have it on the field that is just lying there, make sure that, or if you're on the other side, you just get rid of it because it's going to become a problem. It is one of those key pieces. There are versions of this for Silverthorn, and there are more technical ways to go about the usage of this card, but just a single copy in the soul can make a totally different game out of it. And it's very important to watch out for these, especially because they are the main activators. Going down to the other G1 that I wanted to talk about, that is Midnight Bunny. Now, Midnight Bunny, I just picked a picture because, why not? Midnight Bunny is one of those cards that are very old, much like about the same time as Purple Trapezius, but it kind of showcases how they think. When it's boosted attack, so when it boosts an attack and the attack hits CB1, it goes into soul, something else comes out. Now, it is, by definition, not a great combo. Remember that CB1 is basically either one damage, one card into your hand, or one card onto your field, but in this case, you don't get either of those cases because she also goes back in. What does make her strong, though, is this all happens during the combat phase. The difference here is you're hoping at least, that when you do it during the combat phase, you are increasing your advantage because that increases the number of attacks, increases the power of your next attack, or otherwise makes amazing stuff happen. And she is a key activator because she can hide on the back and just be a nuisance, constantly threatening to have an extra attack just because of her existence. Watch out for her just because of that fact. It is very scary to deal with her because of certain factors such as this. There are versions of this in Silverthorn, and it's one of those cards that, even today, I would say is a very decent choice just because of the way that it plays. Lastly, and not looking at too many cards for this clan, Lark Pigeon is to me, not a very good card, honestly speaking. But it's one of those cards that could catch you off guard, and it kind of teaches you a good lesson. And this, it activates when you're in the soul. When it's in the soul, this card at the beginning of your guard step, if you have a Pale Moon Vanguard, if you do not have any cards in your hand, you may call this card to the Guardian Circle as rest. In other words, if you are defenseless, you can make it guard for you. Now, since it only activates at the beginning of the guard step, it's not actually that big a deal. It could potentially break really close games, but otherwise is not very good. What's important to note here is the lifeblood of Pale Moon, as I've been saying over and over again in this talk, is the soul. They're going to take advantage of the soul. The soul is where all of their advantage is going to come from. If you can in any way disrupt it by getting rid of their Trapezius, stopping the Midnight Bunnies from activating, or any other pieces for that matter, they will be at a huge disadvantage. And if they don't have any good cards in soul, if their soul is full of triggers, they can't play their tricks, they are way behind and are essentially a vanilla clan. Lark Pigeon teaches you have to check their soul constantly, because things inside their soul are not lost cards unlike in other clans, and can potentially break the game just because you weren't paying attention. They had this card in soul. Why did you let that hit? You were supposed to guard at that moment. Or you were supposed to let that hit because it didn't matter. There was nothing good in their soul. Always watch out for this. It is very important that you watch this, and it's highly, highly important that the soul is controlled as much as humanly possible. I think that's it for Pale Moon. Pale Moon is one of those clans, when you think about it, it's not simple. You could make it simple. You could just have things coming out and then power boost and wreck their face, but the strength of the clan comes in being unpredictable. Things go in and out, game plans can change. The cards have this tendency of being very open-ended because of the fact that they come out of soul. Things that are in your hand, things that are in your soul are essentially in your hand. They are basically part of your repertoire. And as the game goes on, that repertoire grows, and it becomes a game of cat and mouse trying to figure out how to fit this puzzle into the final piece of beating your opponent. They do not have the push of a lot of other clans and end up having a lot of tiny controls, but they tend to save hand because of the fact that if they have a good soul, they don't have to play a good hand. They can hold on to the cards in their hand. On the flip side, if they don't have a good soul, they will have to spend their hand to gain that advantage back. This is the essence of Dark Zone. You will notice that in most of Dark Zone, they have the same idea where their hand is used as a function to fix the difficulties inside the clan. In this case, it's because there was nothing good in the soul. Now, if you're up against a Pale Moon, watching that soul is very important. It's probably your key indicator. Counterblast in this clan is mostly CB1, so there's not much you can do to control it because it's quite compartmentalized quite well. It's a very difficult clan to control in damage. Might as well just go all out because it's not going to matter. Many of the activators inside Pale Moon actually do not cost Counterblast. Only the fancier ones, the very strong ones, do. Why cost it at CB1 if something has to go back into the soul? It makes sense, but in that case, they are on the cheap side and things jump in and out constantly, making them very difficult to count the number of attacks. If you are playing this, I would highly suggest, especially if it's not your deck, read through your deck every single card before you go into the match. It is not the kind of deck that you can just pick up and play, especially if somebody else had came up with a deck. The soul is your main proprietary, so you're going to have to watch out for how many copies of each card is in the deck. What you ride is very, very, very important to the way the clan all operate, and watching out for how many copies are left is quite important. It's not a difficult clan to figure out, but you are going to have to figure it out. Comes with the territory, something to think about, and it's very important that you think through before you make any decisions just because of how many pieces rely on your soul. Your soul is part of your hand. So you're going to have to watch out for what is in your hand versus what is in your soul and how you're going to put these two pieces together to make a 3, 4, 5 attack play. Anyway, this has been Extreme Wirehead. That is my look at Pale Moon. If you want to learn more about this clan, I suggest you take a look at the wikis, take a look at all the cards, run through the numbers. You can definitely mix and match with this clan. This is a clan where pieces just come in, come out. You can have one-ofs, you can have two-ofs. You can play around with the ideas and it'll be amazing. But what is important in this clan is trying to figure out what exactly you want to do and how many of these tricks you want versus how consistent you want to be on each kind of trick. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about Pale Moon. That basically closes out Dark Zone, and I'm moving on to another one. I hope that you enjoyed this intro series. If you did, then let me know. I enjoyed Pale Moon quite a lot. Didn't want to talk too much about the different cards because it's so complicated, just an intro. But it's one of those clans that I think you should experience for yourself. It's quite an interesting experience. Anyway, this has been Extreme Wirehead, and I'll leave you to it. See you next time.